right, so let's get this going. Good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you're coming in from. My name is Milton Reynolds, and I'm coming out here from the San Francisco Bay Area, historic and present Muwekma Ohlone land. I'm excited today to chair a panel with you, Eugenics and Environmental Justice. Today's panel will have an opportunity to speak with three different scholars, Bahia Wheeler, Brooke Takala, and Judy Dow, and they will come on in that order. So we look forward to having them each present, and then they'll be in conversation, and we should have some time for some questions as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and invite Bahia into the screen. Bahia Wheeler is a Maui scholar, activist, and doctoral candidate in the Australian National University researching ancestral land and ocean management for Indigenous future in Ma'ahoe Nui. Her Moana genealogies trace her roots to Tahiti Island and Mangareva Island. Bahia is an advocate for independence and nuclear justice in Ma'ahoe Nui and wider Oceania. Her panel, Ma'ahoe, Futurism in a Time of Nuclear Justice and Climate Change, is what we're going to hear right now, and excited. So thank you, Bahia, for being here. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, Yorana Tato. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to From Small Beginnings for organizing this very interesting symposium. Yes, so I'll start with a description of myself. I'm a woman in my mid-30s with brownish skin and black hair that's pulled back. I'm wearing a purple top, brown eyes, and blue dangly earrings. And today I'll be talking about Mohi futurisms in a time of nuclear justice and climate change. So Mohi Nui, just to start with, to situate us, this is where I'm coming from. This is where I trace my genealogy to. I'm located on Tahiti Island in a territory known as French Polynesia, but I don't refer to this place as French Polynesia. I refer to it as Mohi Nui. This is an attempt by the indigenous people of the territory to have an indigenous name, but we're not all upon agreement on it. But this is the word that we have, or the phrase that we have for right now. We're located in the South Pacific. We're about 118 islands. And we are, our governing body since the late 1800s has been France, a country in Europe. Just to give you some idea of how far that is from us, that's 15,906 kilometers from us in the Pacific, 9,883 miles, or in flight time, 17.43 hours. So the distance between ourselves and our colonial relationship, France, is not a logical or natural relationship between our territory and ourselves, and France, but a colonial and imperialist one, where France has a geopolitical interest in keeping a presence in the Pacific, and they do so through ourselves, their other French territories, Ubeamo Kutuna, and also their other French territory, Kanaki, New Caledonia. Oh, sorry, 1 minute. Ooh, oh. So when it comes to environmental justice in our territory, there is an issue of nuclear testing in the Pacific. I mean, this is a really dark period, and this is a very unfortunate time, but this was the reality of what happened here in the 1940s. It started with the UK, the US, and the Soviet Union. They started their nuclear testing agenda in the Pacific much before France did. France started originally in the 1940s in Algeria, but then they also, Algeria became independent in the 1960s. So France had to leave in Algeria and then came to the Pacific instead, because this is already where nuclear testing was happening. And of course, this is because of the Cold War atmosphere at this time, the East versus West, Russia versus the US, and communism versus capitalism. And this was for the buildup of nuclear arms, And the reason that these countries came to us in the Pacific is because it's far from their own countries where they live, and they're using the ideology that we've already spoken about, but the islands as laboratories kind of ideology, where islands can serve as a lab scientific testing ground. So when France started their nuclear testing in the Pacific, they started 3 years after the US, Soviet Union, and UK signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty. And this Partial Test Ban Treaty was signed between these three countries in order to discontinue atmospheric testing. And atmospheric testing was shown to have extreme nuclear fallout consequences on environment and health. So these three countries had signed this treaty in 1963. Therefore, that means they discontinued atmospheric tests. France came to the Pacific and they continued atmospheric tests and underground tests. So they knowingly came here, exposing us to atmospheric contamination to our islands called Moruroa Whangataufa Island, which had experienced all these nuclear weapons, but also the surrounding islands, such as the island I live on, Tahiti, because we are downwind from these islands. So everyone basically in this territory has been exposed to nuclear contamination. And that's from 1966 to 1996. So 30 years, 193 nuclear weapons tested by the French state in Mo'ohinui, which is much more than the other countries have done in the Pacific. Not that to say that any amount is good, but 193 is almost double of what any other country has done in the Pacific. So today in 2003, we're continuing to face the health and environmental consequences of these tests. This is what I call a slow genocide, because France knowingly tested these tests in our country, in our territory, knowing that we would be affected for generations to come, because we basically live in a radioactive zone. And even to this day, we live in a radioactive zone. There's just doesn't seem to be much that we can do about it. But we have a lot of activists who speak out against this, such as this woman that I have pictured here, Hina Moyota Cross. She says, well, she's a victim of leukemia, and it's been about 9 years, but she's one of several in her family who experience radioactive induced sickness in our territory. And her famous quote is that the greatness of France, I carried it in my flesh and my blood. And so she's saying the way that France has developed itself over the years is through using us as a sacrifice zone. The environmental consequences that we are facing are, I assume, to be extremely important, but we actually have a lack of data on how much we are affected. If we do have data on it, we have a lack of transparency. Like even myself as a researcher, I have a very hard time finding research about how much we are affected environmentally. And we have a lack of independent studies about the consequences of nuclear weapons. And this is important to say because most or all of French-funded research claims that the tests have had minimal impacts. And so we're in the year of 2023. France continues to claim that the tests have minimal impacts. They even currently have a research group that's trying to rewrite the history and omitting very critical information about our own history and what happened in the past to our people. So that's the nuclear testing context that we've experienced here in our territory, and we're living with that today. And then we're also facing this new issue, environmental injustice issue of climate change. So we're in the Pacific and we're affected by climate change like all of our surrounding nations. And we're going to experience coral bleaching, which I have a picture of here. The coral bleaching events that happen in our territory, flooding that happens yearly on a yearly basis here, inundations, and we'll be facing an increase in hurricanes and also an increase in hurricanes coming up. So again, the climate change issue is not something that was initiated by our own people in the Pacific, but something that is the result of developed countries, and we are now facing the consequences of that. So if we're looking forward from here, we have our own nuclear justice activists that work continuously for truth and justice. This is their like slogan, that we're working for truth and justice about what actually happened to us in this territory and how France can move forward with more medical care for us and more hospitals, more reparations perhaps to the people that are affected. And then we also have NGOs working on climate change issues, but they would need to, I think our climate change activists or climate activists need to have a more holistic approach, which includes the nuclear testing context. I mean, this is a very political issue that not a lot of people want to touch, but we have to be honest about what we're living in right now in order to move forward. And we, of course, need our own government and France to do more for us, and with our own voices leading the way. And so, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Again, I'm a PhD candidate in Pacific Studies at the Australian National University, and I look forward to our further discussions.
So I'll introduce our second panelist. Our second panelist's name is Brooke Takala. Brooke Takala is an independent academic with a background in ethnic studies and education. She's also a policy analyst, children's book author, and a mother based in Maduro. In a conversation with Brooke, she states that she is all these things, but the center of her work and her existence is motherhood, and trying to add to a long-established trajectory of other mothers mothering towards a just world. She says that she feels that her background was all preparation to mother her beautiful children, and that they are internally displaced by U.S. nuclearism, and this has framed the ways in which she, as a mother, approaches her work. It's in this respect that mothering is a very political action, especially when my children's mere existence is a resistance to ongoing oppression. So thank you for being here, Brooke, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Milton, and Maruru, Vehia, Yahweh, everybody. Benedict, thank you for organizing this really timely symposium. Thank you to everyone helping you to organize, and especially my fellow panelists. Yeah, I didn't prepare slides. I just wanted to be able to talk, and then hopefully we can start a really good dialogue on our topic. So as Milton said, you know, I really identify as a mother. My children are internally displaced from US nuclear testing, and really all of my work revolves around that. And also more recently, similar experiences with the people of Lip Island as a result of ongoing US missile testing on Kwajalein Atoll. And also to add to that, that my own mother was part of human subject radiation experimentation in the United States. And so, you know, my children have inherited these genetics doubly from nuclear legacy living within them. And really thank you to Vehia for opening up the discussion based on nuclearism, and the Marshallese experience is very similar. And like she said, the nuclear tests in Tahiti were about 3 times as much as what were experienced here on Enewetak. 43 nuclear and thermonuclear tests, including the first hydrogen bomb, which was the Ivy Mike shot. You know, the islands here are really mostly defined by a body of knowledge that was determined by outsiders, anthropologically, and then also the hard sciences. And I think in particular, through my research, going through so many studies, I mean, there are hundreds upon hundreds of studies that were conducted in the Marshall Islands, and in particular on Enewetak Atoll. And one in particular was with he's considered a renowned anthropologist, Jack Tobin. And when I went through his archives at the University of Hawaii, I was going through his personal notes, and he was trying to get access to closed knowledge. When we look at open and closed knowledge, what is able to be shared within the realm of indigenous knowledge, indigenous science. And he kept going to the chiefs, the grandfathers of my children, asking them for their genealogy, and they would not give it to him. They weren't saying no. He wrote in his notes that he couldn't get responses from these knowledge holders, which, if he had any amount of cultural capital, he would have just stopped asking and taking that as a no. But instead, he went to other people and received knowledge. And then when I went through the genealogy that he had written down, I myself, am privy to that knowledge because of my children, and noticed that it was incorrect, and took that back to the community. And they were astounded that this was, now put into writing, published, and taken as fact. There's another anthropologist who has built his career on the Inuit people, Larry Carucci from the University of Chicago, who calls himself the foremost expert on Eniwetok lifeways. And he, in fact, never, ever takes his research back to the community. So when I started taking books and articles back to the Eniwetok community, translating and explaining what he had been writing about them, they were just shocked. They had taken care of this man while he was on their island, and they never expected to be treated as subjects as they were. And then on the other side, we have the science that has come out, even from shark behavior to testing on coral reefs, and that determines even current actions that are happening. And as what the previous panelists talk about, the genetics testing that are still ongoing, when we have to give samples to the DOE when they monitor our levels of cesium, plutonium, after we visit certain islands on Eniwetok, and we don't get the results back, and we don't get those samples back. And this became very challenging when I was doing my own doctoral research, that it was so difficult to process everything that I was reading, because it was written about people that I love, and my children, really, and their past and their futures, and knowing that their past is 3,000 years before this period of time that tends to define Eniwetok and defines the Marshall Islands. And then around that time, I came across a tweet from Leilani Sabsalian, and she talked about that the reason it is easier for white academics to publish and make tenure and advance their careers writing about colonization is that the archives don't haunt them, and the trauma doesn't live in their bones, and they don't have to put books down to breathe. And for me, I'm in an insider-outsider status, but I took that as, when it lives in our wombs as well, that it became such a challenge to do the work, because it was, really written about all of these people that I care about. And when we have all these outside researchers, they have a distance to it, and they're approaching things from a different epistemology, and a different ontology, and that we need to start fostering, as some of the other panelists have mentioned, fostering more localized research, So we see the impacts of this in our pursuit of justice, even in the last 2 weeks. If we look at the RMI's voting record at the UNGA, and last week at Fourth Committee, when we talk about Palestine and their rights as oppressed people, the RMI is voting in line with the US and Israel. And so we can see that deep impact into our political policies as well. So perhaps I'll stop with that, and then that will leave us with a bit more time to have more interactive dialogue. But thank you again.
Thank you for that, Brooke. We appreciate that and look forward to being in conversation with you shortly. So now I'll introduce the third panelist, Judy Dow. So Judy Dow is an artist, writer, and educator. She serves as executive director of Gedakina, a generational endeavor to strengthen and revitalize the cultural knowledge and identity of Native American women and their families from across New England. Gedakina works to conserve traditional Native American homelands and places of historical, ecological, and spiritual significance, and to educate others as to their importance. It is through their programs that Gedakina serves to deconstruct racism and continual colonialism, gathering people together from different families, communities, and regions to work on issues of mutual importance and impact. And she's going to share her talk, Eucalyptus, Eugenics, and Environmental Equity. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Milton. So not to confuse everybody, I live in Vermont. I'm a grandmother, and like Brooke, I started doing all of this because of my grandchildren. I taught for 38 years, and when my grandchildren were born, I was like, oh no, they're not going to have a world to live in. I've got to do something. I still teach. I travel a lot through Gedakina, and I've been part of a teachers exchange program with Hawaiian teachers for quite a few times now. I think we've had 6 exchanges, and we go there and they come here. And one of the things that has always interested me when I went there was they look at the word eugenics as something that they knew about, they know about, they connect with people and what happens to people, in specific the Bishop Museum, the anthropological exhibit they had there, but not so much with the land. And the one thing that I learned here when my grandmother was scooped off the street and placed in an institution was that there's a huge connection with eugenics and breaking up family history and continuity. And it wasn't always about institutionalizing people or sterilizing them. And sometimes just breaking up the family and the history and the continuity was far more disastrous. So anyways, we went this last February back to the Big Island as part of an exchange program. And we were taken to a eucalyptus plantation. And we met with the people from Maui, and they presented us with the history. We learned that there are like over 5 million eucalyptus trees planted on the island between 1910 and 1960, and that it was creating this, people did it for a couple of reasons: to create a forest, to create opportunities and connections with foreigners, for developing an economy. And what they didn't realize was so much that eucalyptus trees are not a forest, it's a monoculture. It actually secretes a chemical that prevents diversity. It only allows other eucalyptus trees to grow. And so because this happened, the trees started growing, and this part of the Hawaiian culture is all wrapped around ohana, or family. And they have these wonderful relationships with every part of the land and all of the people and kin and kinships, but the connection with the land was changing because there was no diversity there. It was just eucalyptus trees. And so lots of things happened. It deprived them of the cultural heritage that was covered with the eucalyptus trees that deprived them of fresh water resources, healthy and fertile soil, and the opportunity to adapt a plantation because it has less carbon-rich soil than what they replaced, which was usually bankrupt sugar plantations. They talked about doing this with it and doing that with it. And the particular place that we went to was in Hamakuea district, which planted trees from 1995 to 1997. Kamehameha Schools purchased this land during that time. It was a bankrupt sugar plantation, and they started to grow eucalyptus trees with the intentions of it building a sawmill and teaching the students woodworking skills. And that didn't happen. It didn't come about because the community didn't want it. They didn't want the trees. They didn't want the sawmill. And so today they have these 40-year-old trees that are just there. So what's happening is it became on the perimeter of the island where this was located, it became something that was a solid wall of 40-year-old trees. And Huey Mao decided they were going to start clearing some of it. And they did this really amazing back-breaking work and got grants and got volunteers and got kin and kinships together. And they removed the trees in 10 acres. And they planted the food back on the land that the people wanted. And they planted diversity. They planted love and family back on the land. And then upstream in the center of the island, there was a change in the land. The ocean breeze was now getting to the center. The land was not as dry. The eucalyptus trees had been hoarding water, and they had stopped hoarding the water. And so little trickles of streams started to appear, and they were able to plant more diverse food in the center of the islands for the people. And they started to reclaim. There was a lot that not only was there a loss of food, there was a loss of stories and lessons. There was a loss of spiritual connection, and the ocean breeze. There was a loss from that and the cooling effects, and so they began to choke out a lot of the native lifeways. And so what happened was it started to come back when these 10 acres were cleared. And I have so much respect for the hard work that these people put in and the vision they have to continue this work, because to me, this was so clearly break up family, break up history, break up continuity. And these young people have been working so hard to reclaim it. When I first heard their story, I thought, oh my goodness, it took them so long to get this 10 acres done. Is it going to be enough time? Is there going to be enough? Are they going to be able to make a big difference? And then I read about a couple of companies duking it out over biomass, using eucalyptus trees for biomass. And I am experiencing that here in Vermont. I am on the Vermont Climate Council's Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, the Life Cycle Analysis, and the Biomass Task Force. And the same thing is happening. It's this story, this narrative of lies. And it's a story where oh, we're at net zero because we only have to cut the greenhouse gas emission. We only have to count the greenhouse gas emission when they cut down the trees, not when they burn it. But so it went on and on. The battle went to court. This one won, that one won, and went back and forth. And so eventually it was calculated that the greenhouse gases were going to be over 8,035,804 metric tons of carbon dioxide that would be emitted in a 30-year lifetime of this biomass generating plant. And so finally, this organization called Life of Land was able to win the case, proving how detrimental it is. And so in preparing to share our learning experience with you today, I called the people at Huey Mel and I said, is this done? Is this over with? Have you actually won this battle? And their answer was, for now. So it appears that it's a battle that's going to continue, and people need to understand what is happening. That they're taking lifeways away from people, history and sacred places by creating these monocultures that they call forests that they want to plant and burn for biomass. And of course, the biomass releases more carbon dioxide than coal. And these for-profit thinkers can't put the land first. They can only put economy first. And if we continue down this path, and economy always being our ultimate goal, we'll never succeed. We can't have a healthy economy if we don't have healthy land. Healthy land must be first, and we must be able to weave traditional ecological knowledges together with Western sciences if we're going to succeed at all. And so I started doing this research and fighting on this climate change issue when I realized the life was changing for my grandchildren. And so this is what I do now. I travel, I collect these stories, I share these stories, I talk about commonalities and where it's the same story in this place, it's worse in this place, and it's less in this place. And so I just wanted to share this story with you, and to thank the people at Hui Mao for all the hard work that they're doing. I have great respect and honor for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I appreciate the story and the power of the stories that you shared. What I'd like to do right now is to invite all the panelists back so we can engage in some discussion. I also want to invite the audience members to continue to post questions in the chat, and with time, we should be able to get to a few of them. But before I visit some questions on you, thank you all for your panels. I'm wondering, is there anything that any of you said or shared that you would like to respond to? So I'd love to open up the floor if there's either a question or maybe an affirmation or something you want to offer up to the other panelists. And if there's not, then I'll go ahead and move some questions forward, but I want to open it up.
Yeah, I'll go. Well, it's always good to hear from people in other places that have been affected by nuclear testing. So, such as yourself, Brooke, because yeah, our situations are so similar, and what we can learn from each other, and it just feels like it's good to know you're not alone, like in dealing with this gigantic, nasty history and how to move forward with it. So yeah, and thank you to Judy as well for talking so much about the land and how important it is for us as Indigenous people.
Thank you. I have a question for Brooke and Bahia. Is there much work being done to protect the land or to fix the land? So for instance, I know they planted sunflowers at Chernobyl to pull the radiation out of the soil, because they draw heavy metals out of the soil. Do you know of anything that's happening on either of your islands?
You want to go first, Vihia? Okay. So in terms of remediation, it's quite complex. So in the late 90s, our Inuiatak chiefs filed a lawsuit. Well, first of all, because of the Compact of Free Association, the islands cannot directly file lawsuits against the United States. All had to go through what is called the Nuclear Claims Tribunal, which was minimally funded to address claims put forth by what we call the 4 affected atolls, Enuiatak, Rongelap, Utarug, and Bikini. And then all of the claims for health impacts. So remediation, the 4 atolls filed cases, and Enuiatak won their case in 2006 to the tune of about $385 million. They received $1 million of that settlement, and $100 million of that was to go toward remediation. That never happened. So what did happen, though, while still under trust, as a trust territory of the United States, they did a cleanup, which entitled scraping all of the topsoil into just the open ocean, into some of the bomb craters, and then there's one island called Runet Island where they put Cactus Dome, which there's a huge hole in the island that they filled with contaminated matter, covered it with concrete. That is the extent of radiation. We did have a really amazing Cook Island Maori man, Franco, who lived on the island for many, many years and was doing different remediation using blue-green algae and trying to help the health of the islanders, through the soil. However, there's also internal politics that we have to deal with. So leadership of Enuiatak and their close proximity to the United States, that Franco was pushed off the island by them. So that's where the remediation ended. And the US has an obligation, but they're not doing anything. So the other challenge is that, so we have an NGO, we brought in some Japanese scientists and to collect some soil samples. Now, the challenge is the only way out of the country really is to go through the United States, either Hawaii or through Guam, and you can't take soil out. So they've blocked our ways to do independent citizen science, to sample our own soils, to test for levels of radiation, and to try to do any sort of remediation activities. So not to say any more, but we have to come up with very creative ways to get soil out of the country in order to test it. The US Department of Energy comes regularly, takes samples, and never gives us the information back. So remediation, it's not happening, and it's something that we want to have the ability to test independently, and we want to have the ability to come up with these ways of remediation. And it's actually not even a priority of the RMI government as a whole. So that's where we are. I would imagine it's somewhat similar from what I know that happens in Maui Nui. So Vihia, over to you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Yes, so many similarities in terms of blocking independent studies through various means. Like, just some people are supposed to do studies here, and then all of a sudden it doesn't happen, and it's like we don't know why, but you have to kind of assume. about what's going on. And then specifically for the two atolls where the nuclear testing was conducted, I'm not exactly sure what exactly like the cleanup is or what efforts have been done, but I know that places that are downwind, yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing. Like downwind from Morodoa, there's an island called Mangareva where, I mean, there was just testimonials of people falling dead right after these tests had happened. And so they don't have a hospital there. They have one small clinic that has one doctor, and so they can't even really understand like how much they are really affected even now. But even their environment, like what happens is that people just don't eat fish. They don't eat certain types of fish that they think are more contaminated than others. And so, yeah, you go there and people will import fish from Tahiti Island so that they can eat it in their own island. I mean, an island that doesn't fish, I mean, that's basically like killing off the population because how are you supposed to survive on that island? So that's just one example, but yeah, it's really nothing where it should be, even though France has and the US, they have the money to do this, And I just like to address this person that asked in the chat about the public's knowledge on the nuclear testing here in Mohinui. So, is there a common consensus among Tahitians about how harmful France's nuclear testing was? No, it's a pretty big spectrum where people have just complete ignorance, like they don't know at all that it happened, or they think 4 or 5 tests happened, which is not good. But I mean, 4 or 5 is not good anyway, but they really just don't, some people don't know the extremity of it where it's 193. And that's because they don't teach it in the schools. They don't teach it. I mean, we kind of talk about it on TV because of our activists. But if you're not plugged into those things, then I guess you can miss it. But then also, the French government was telling us during this time of testing that these were quote unquote clean bombs, so that we wouldn't be affected at all. And some people who worked at these military bases, such as members of my own family, will still say that it's like a clean bomb and that nothing is going to come of it. So it's like complete ignorance or just like lying to ourselves. Um, and more examples of what Maohi people are doing to achieve justice. Well, we're trying to get in more studies, definitely. We're trying to advocate. I mean, the medical care is really important because we have one hospital here for the whole territory. Yeah, and so many of our people have to go to France in order to get medical care for cancer treatments. And that is basically, I think, state funded. So, but I don't know exactly like how much they're funding that medical care, but it should be closer to our own territory. So they advocate for more medical care, and especially personalized medical care of how our own genes are affected and how we can have personalized medical care. And then also people are advocating for reparations, so monetary reparations. I don't know. That's also a debate, like, is that going to solve anything? But yeah, those are the biggest examples I can think of.
Try
Great.
sunflowers.
Try sunflowers, yeah. So thanks for that opening salvo. I so appreciate the contributions of your work. I mean, being involved in this work over the course of the last several years, what's been interesting is to see how the introduction of new narratives is both asserting control that there are other narratives, but they're also doing really important work of revising a shared understanding of eugenics. And it does so by centering the voices of indigenous communities and frontline communities. I think what's been particularly interesting about your talk is that it speaks to eugenic harms, some of which are time-bound and others are less time-bound. And so I'm wondering, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of, again, centering indigenous and frontline perspectives and perhaps illuminating new ways of understanding how we might attend to these harms over time. right? Recognizing the harms don't exist solely in the past, that many of them are very present. So how do we reconcile that, and what's the importance of the particular voices that you're bringing to the table in that process? And anybody can start, but I'd love to hear you all speak to that at some point.
I don't mind going first. I know here at home, we've I've fought to pass a bill in the legislation to develop a committee, a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And I think legislatively, people need to start doing that. Although they don't work all the time, I think it's important to still share your voice, have your voice recorded, and get it out there. I also think there has to be panels like this and other educational programs that help people to understand. I spent 35 years studying the Vermont Eugenics survey records, and I went to every 80 and 90-year-old I knew. And they knew everything that was happening. They just didn't have the word. They didn't know what it was. And when I got all done explaining it to them and sharing the documentation I had, all they could say was, "Those bastards." That's all they could say. They had nothing more to say when they finally realized it was an organized plan. And so I don't think we can ever do enough with around education and truth and reconciliation.
Okay, thank you, Judy. Here, maybe in that order.
So this would take a long time to really fully address speaking to the harms. I think just to keep things brief, speaking to the harms that are now policy related, now embedding themselves into our policies, like when I mentioned the voting at the UN and the implications that will have for us. So as we go to other countries or go to the United Nations, go to these other bodies, requesting assistance, requesting support, why would they support us and our plight for our rights to be recognized when we do not recognize the rights of others? And I think, to me, in the context of right now, it's so disappointing and very heartbreaking that all of the work that has been done is just basically scrapped, and we have to start over now of advocating. And in terms of the academics of it all, you know, it's just really problematic when a lot of these academics don't even speak Marshallese and are interpreting through an interpreter, and then creating a body of knowledge that is not necessarily verified by the communities with whom they're supposedly helping. And then also that notion of helping instead of working in allyship, living in solidarity, that also to that.
Thank you. Bahia, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's extremely important that we have our own voices leading the way. Because we've been kind of bombarded also by outside researchers here. It's like kind of the nuclear testing issue is kind of like sensationalized, if you will. It's like people come here often and they want to make documentaries about it. You know, people have never been here before. They want to make documentaries about it. They want to interview people who are traumatized, and so yeah, all of that. I just don't feel like we need much of it. What we need is quality work. So if outside reaches come in, they need to be quality. And then also we have issues between our own people not supporting the nuclear testing justice because their own interests with and alliances with the French state. So that is also something that we need to work out. But that's like all other people, where it's like we have our own stuff to work out between ourselves. But yeah, but I don't feel like it will be led by outsiders. You know what I mean? I mean, it should be led by us, despite all that.
So maybe picking up on that theme of, frontline communities actually doing the work and leading the work and informing the work. Um, what does accountability look like for those who perpetrated these harms? But also, how do we avoid visiting the harms on other people or other living things? I mean, I think one of the challenges of eugenics is that it establishes a sort of a hierarchy of value, some of which facilitates extractive relationships with nature, but it also informs the way in which certain human populations are seen as more worthy or deserving of having harms visited upon them and others to be relieved from those harms. And so how do we seek both accountability and repair in a world that is deeply framed by these notions of hierarchical value, which are constructed, but in many cases impoverish our ability to see that there are natural systems that can be repaired, but if we see them in a hierarchical lens, we can't really do the work. So I guess I'm sort of moving around a little bit, but I'm wondering, what does repair look and feel like, and why is it important to center frontline communities?
I don't mind going first. This is something I've been dealing with my whole life. And I've had a lot of years in my life. So I think it has to start with acknowledgement. If people don't acknowledge what they did wrong, we can never heal. We can never repair. I think if people take the time to acknowledge what was done and it was wrong to do what was done, then maybe we can have a chance to heal. Because that's a start. That's a start for so many things. And instead they continuously cause trauma by denying it, or saying somebody else did that, not me, or lying on the tests and saying, yeah, this soil's fine. There was nothing wrong. And so I think we cannot have repair until we're given the chance to heal, and we cannot heal unless people acknowledge the wrongs.
Thank you for getting that started, Judy.
Mhm.
Maybe Bahia, you want to take a crack at it, and then we'll pass it to Brooke?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm just in total agreement. Like, acknowledgement is the first step, even though it's really painful, I think, even for our own people to understand how much yeah, what we're living with and to what extent we're living with it. I think that people actually even ignore it, maybe on purpose, because they don't want to deal with that kind of truth. Because once you know it, then I mean, I don't have any like really amazing resolutions for how to move forward with that either. You know, like, yeah, now we know it's truth, but then really what can you do? Is money going to solve things? Like I said, more medical access would be is imperative. But yeah, it just brings up a lot of questions for myself as well, so that I think need to be continued to be discussed.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Brooke?
Well, agreeing with everyone as well. And the trauma is so persistent on a daily basis. And I think, yeah, you have to almost sort of disassociate in a way in order to just get through with your day-to-day life at times. But also that we are living with the impacts of the health implications, nursing our family members through radiogenic cancers and other illnesses, and all of the other community impacts that come with that, you know, higher rates of suicide, depression, alcohol abuse, drug abuse. And at the same time, we're having to make preparations for the future. So, you know, so for example, climate change, preparing for our upcoming king tides, as we are still processing the impacts we're facing right now of, drought, or on top of that, the compounding impacts of the nuclear legacy, and just going further back to colonialism and the impacts that it's had on the knowledge systems that were safety nets here, and increased violence and things like that. So it's so compounded, and yet everybody is, the outside is still trying to define those pasts and those futures for our communities here.
So one of the things that eugenics obscures is that we're smarter and better as a collective, right? Our value is not in a hierarchical relationship with each other, but in relationship with each other, in relationship, with the world and all other living things. As we peer into the grim nature of this history, it can be disempowering. But I also think that understanding eugenics and using it as an analytical lens can invite us into different kinds of understandings. And I think that's particularly true when we're working together. I know in your introduction, Brooke, you centered the importance of motherhood. And I think a lot about the next generation or subsequent generations as being part of the solution, and inviting them into a place of agency, by speaking truthfully about the past as a way of perhaps inviting them to imagine a different kind of future. So as you think about the longer trajectory of your work and the things that you're doing, how do you see yourself as facilitators of this change, and perhaps a change of direction, a pivot back towards a deeper repair that's rooted in reconnecting, right? And establishing the relationships that too oftentimes are fractured by eugenic impositions. So how does your work help us move forward in that project? Or what do you hope your work will do?
Yeah, I'll respond. So when you mentioned the future generations, I'm really excited about how our future generations can are so creative and can come up with ideas that that we haven't even thought of. But by being informed, by what we're doing, by informing people, by analyzing things in this way, and supporting the future generations, hopefully they really can take it to a place that we couldn't even imagine.
Appreciate that. Maybe Brooke and Judy, and then we'll close.
Well, for me, it goes back to being a mother. I mean, really. And I also homeschool my boys and make sure that they don't fall in line with that regular thinking of their island is defined from either the time of World War II or the nuclear testing, that it's beyond that. And that Runit Island, which, people talk about the infamous Runit Dome, is their island. They are the landowners of that island. And we talk about the island and the history of the island. And now there's a thing on their island, but that does not disconnect them from the responsibility to their island. It just happens that that's there, and now we have to deal with it. So let's not forget about the history of their island from 3,000 years prior, and all of the history and all of the bravery of their family. And also, I tell them all the time, nuclear weapons couldn't even destroy you. You are still here. So your existence is resistance, and these people tried their best to destroy you through colonization, through war, through nuclear weapons, and you're still here. So that shows your power, you know, just to really make sure that they feel empowered. And then with my work, leaving behind a body of knowledge that is you know, not in line with what we usually see, and it's not necessarily available to the outside. I'm not writing it, I'm not producing it for the outside, I'm producing it for our children. And so that is there is something there that can counter what they will find in their libraries or through their studies, that I can leave behind at least a bit of something. And then mostly though within my children, that they will carry that on themselves.
Thank you for that. Judy, maybe in closing?
Yeah, I embrace everything that these ladies have said, but I also want to reinforce how important education is. We have to know the past if we're ever going to understand today, and we cannot direct the future in a good way if we don't understand today. So we have to get to that point. We have to get our children to the point of understanding where we're at today before they can take agency to direct the future in a good way.
Such powerful words, so much wisdom, and thank you all for your work. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you, and I'm sure it won't be the last exchange we're in, so I look forward to continued interaction. And I also want to just sort of give a thanks to the organizers of this event and to the participants and the other panelists who have invited us into different kinds of understandings and into different kinds of possibilities. And so with that, I think we're going to call this panel to a close. It'll allow the collective to gather back a few more minutes and get back on time. But thank you for your work, and I look forward to the continued forward progress on confronting the legacies of eugenics.
Thank you.
Much